Welcome to Backchat. I'm Hugh Chewitton, your co-host today, Andrew Work. Andrew, good morning to you.
Good morning, Hugh.
We're talking today about the anthem law. It's now part of the basic law, having been added to Annex 3. And the government says it will adopt the measure by way of appropriate local legislation, consistent with the city's constitutional and legal regime. Rita Fan says there's no need to hold a public consultation exercise and that talking to district councils would suffice. Carrie Lamb says only that during the legislative process there will be discussions and certain consultations in society. Well, Rimsky-Ewan says the law won't cover every scenario, so will it be a matter of common sense? Or do we need a complete guide to what to do in every circumstance in, say, a restaurant or on the street? Should we ban playing the anthem for inappropriate purposes? With a lack of consultations over the contentious co-location issue, are there signs that the administration is just giving up on the whole idea of formal consultations? Is that no big deal? Drop us an email, backchat@rthk.hk, our Facebook page, Backchat and RTHK Radio 3. Call us on 233-88266. After 9:20, we're talking about new developments in Saudi Arabia. Joining us for our first discussion, we have with us now Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Foundation, Avery Ng, who's chairman of the Legal Social Democrats, and Chris Young, political analyst and founder of The Voice of Hong Kong. Michael Tien, MC delegate, will be joining us later in the programme as well. Lawrence Ma, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Nice to see you face to face for a change. Yeah. Let's talk about the anthem law. It seems to be a funny kind of law. I mean, one thing is that I'm trying to think of other laws that oblige you to do things. Most laws kind of say you can't do this, you can't do that. But not many laws say you've got to stand up or you've got to sing or you've got to do something. Is it strange in that sense?
Well, I mean, you can actually draft a law to regulate conduct. It's a matter of drafting by requiring certain acts.
But regulating usually means you can't
prohibiting, yes.
Yeah, prohibiting.
Yes. But you can
not obliging someone to do something.
You can draft the negative, or so that it can be drafted in a way that compels conduct. It's really a matter of legal drafting. Hugh, I think that process can be taken up by the legal draftsmen, who are Australians too, by the way. I know her, but it can be done.
Can you give us an example? Like, I mean, if you see somebody get hit by a car, are you required by law to call an ambulance, or is there some kind of a criminal negligence that would fall on you if you don't provide assistance or call an ambulance? I mean, I'm just pulled that out of the air, but I mean, are there examples you can give?
Well, negative prohibitions, I think it can be done. But I'm not a drafting expert, but I can't think of one at the moment. If pressed, no.
Or one that might be in effect in Hong Kong, no. So this may be the first.
That's related to the kind of some confusion, which the government is kind of downplaying, saying it's just a common sense, and if you act in a kind of offensive manner towards the national anthem, will you have committed an offence? But there are all these concerns and people coming up with these various scenarios, all kinds of possibilities of, you know, your venue and how close you are to the music and whether it's public or not and things like this. How would you go about drafting a law that would work, that would be effective and would be transparent and that would have no doubt in anyone's mind?
Well, I mean, if you mirror the existing national flag and emblem law, you might be able to draw some reference from that.
But that says you can't deface or defile.
Section 7, yeah.
So maybe the law was you can't insult the national anthem or you can't behave in an inappropriate manner during the national anthem.
Yeah, prohibiting the negative.
Is there a way to make this law specific in its instances to insult the anthem or insult a flag? I mean, that's a pretty vague thing, and that leads to problems with issues of rule of law when it can be so broadly interpreted as to be almost meaningless.
Well, that's the beauty of our common law system, because the court just have to take into account the why meaning of the terminology to apply to any situation. As everybody understand, you can anticipate all sorts of situations in legal drafting. So it's really applying. So there would be or other conducts at the end of the legislation that that the phrase or other conducts will probably encompass a range of conducts that's dictated by the meaning of the words before. So as a result, then the court would be able to draw a conclusion as to whether this unspecified conduct falls within the class constituted by the words before, or the meaning confined to the words before these general words.
Is it possible to make that crystal clear, or there will always be doubt? I mean, let's take, for example, what happens in the United States with the football players who kneel during the anthem. They want to make a specific political point. Okay, so what they're doing is not exactly disrespectful, but it's not exactly respectful, is it? They're doing something different during the national anthem. If you did that in Hong Kong, if you knelt, say, during the playing of the national anthem?
Well, if you look at the national anthem law in the mainland, it requires you to stand up in a very stern, stood up manner. Now, of course, if you compare with that standard, you are in breach of that standard. That's for sure. But how are we going to moderate or adopt that standard into our law in drafting, then is a technical question for the draftsman.
Because my understanding is that the way they've talked about it in China is that you can't use it for any unauthorized use. So even if you wanted to use it in a respectful way, you're not allowed.
No.
I mean, it's this bizarre situation where a country is actually banning the use of its own national anthem by even people who want to use it in a respectful way. Well, the examples were given, like you shouldn't play it at a funeral, unless it's a government state affair.
When we were in Beijing last week, we spoke with Li Fei, and the requirement was that you can't use it for commercial purposes or parodies in our sense, or change the words or the lyrics of it. So long as you don't do that, there are occasions which you can play. I mean, for example, in many organizations who organize celebrations of the National Day, we play and sing the national anthem.
Yeah, but I mean, they said with the new law, you're going to have to theoretically, you should ask for permission. I mean, quite often these things are not observed. People just kind of go ahead anyways. But
no, I don't think you need to ask for permissions as required by the existing law. You just have to do it you can freely play and sing the national anthem, and you just have to be your conduct would have to fall within that, as well as there is no specific avenues that you should play.
Is China trying to exercise extraterritorial enforcement of this? So if you're in Hong Kong and you do a parody of the national anthem and you cross the border into China, are they going to grab you for what you did in Hong Kong or Taiwan or anywhere else in the world?
I don't think it will be cross-border.
Well, we don't know.
Is this? Would you say this is a vague law? Would it have to be a vague kind of law, or are all the laws a little bit vague? Is it just like any other law in the end?
Well, I mean, if you compare with the national flag law, someone who inverted that flag in Legislative Council, that wasn't covered in the exact language of the word when it was being drafted.
Yeah, because the language says defile or deface, those kinds of things, where you actually do something with the flag, but he turned it upside down, But he was still found guilty.
Yes, because of or other ways, general words following the specific words, and the words or in other ways were given a wide or liberal interpretation, because the entire purpose of the law is to protect the integrity of the flag.
Avery, have you and your gang lawyered up to see what can or can't be done, or what might be possible here?
Well, for one, we are experimenting and try to come up with ways to challenge the law on legal terms in Hong Kong. But however,
why?
However, I have to stress that because it is actually unnecessary, and on principle, we believe that the national anthem law infringe Hong Kong people's freedom of expressions. Now, we can go on and talk about this for a whole hour on that legal issues. But on principle, I have to stress that the introduction of national anthem laws at this point in time is not really specifically for the 100 football fans booing in Hong Kong. It is by Xi Jinping, and it is part of his cohesion of the nation, the rise of nationalism, or what he called the rejuvenation of the Chinese people, and it is worrying because such legislations will basically put a invisible hole on the society. Now, there's always ways that you can put the words drafting the legislations, but at the end of the day, it is you cannot cover all the specific points or occasions, but it sort of force the Hong Kong people to behave a certain way, which they may not want to, and it is their freedom. And it has actually formed a larger part of their policies to reintroducing again the national education. So is the legislation really specific for the football fan? No, I don't think so. Now, would they be able, would the police or the authority be able to enact these laws? I don't think so. But then, in that case, why do we even need the legislation? Now, we see that a lot of these pro-Beijing camp or establishment camp, they downplay the whole thing as a legal issues and don't worry about it. This is just common sense. But you see that over the past few years, what Xi Jinping has been doing and what Hong Kong government has been doing is using this nationalistic rhetoric to sideline any oppositions of the party. And they simply brand any discontent towards the government, whether it's on policy or whether it's on its legitimacy or authority. They simply brand it as not loving the nation or not supporting Xi Jinping. And it is very dangerous. And we saw examples of this nationalism in our history. I mean, Xi Jinping is playing back the Mao Zedong's nationalistic card. So it is very worrying, and we are trying to think of ways to block this legislation. Now, even if we can't block this, now there's ways to drafting the legislation. Like, for example, in many Western countries, they've got national anthem legislation, but it is more of a guideline on how you should play the national anthem in what occasion.
This is the official version. You can have variations, but...
In the United States, they have this. They have a code, but there's no legal sanction.
Yeah, exactly. But in Hong Kong, this national anthem legislation, basically, it is a criminal offense with potential jail time.
Yeah. But it doesn't work in America. People don't
do whatever they want.
People do whatever they want. Now, so the law doesn't work. So you've got to have a sanction.
Yeah. Well, the thing is,
or else there's no point in having the law. To be quite honest.
Exactly. So we don't even need to have the law. Now, in America and anywhere else, because they've got a democratic system to check and balance the government, and the government cannot overuse its power using this vague law. But in Hong Kong and in China, we don't. And you point out earlier a very good case is what if I play with the national anthem or in a sarcastic way? May not be disrespectful, but a creative way in Hong Kong. Well, it is fine for now. But what happens if I go up to the border? And also, secondly, if we've got this law, even though it is not retrospective, cannot retrospectively enact under common law, what happens to those films, movies?
Oh, you play an old movie?
Yeah, old movies, which was very common in Hong Kong.
Sure.
So should we take all those down? So back to the basic is that they are trying to introduce this nationalistic rhetoric in our society, especially in the schools.
Could it have the opposite effect? I mean, could it just kill the national anthem in Hong Kong? I mean, you'd have to learn it in school. They'd play it at government functions, and everybody else would just be afraid to do anything with it the rest of the time. You would never hear it anywhere.
That's the key words, afraid.
Yeah.
That's the key words, is fear.
Yeah.
You don't know whether you are going to infringe the law, so you may as well just don't do anything. Including your expressions.
You can talk about the psychology, you can talk about the history, but it's there. It's in the basic law.
Then if we want to codify it as a guideline rather than a criminal offense. And even if supposedly you have to follow the rules and have to make it a criminal offense, make it the least lenient without any severe punishment.
Yeah. All right, Chris Young is also with us, political analyst. Chris, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us once again. What about the issue of the consultation? Rita Fan has been saying, we usually take kind of one angle, has been saying there's no need for a consultation. Maybe you could talk to the district councils if you like. The government's been very kind of wary of certainly committing to any kind of formal consultation and basically saying there will be consultations with a small c of some kind or whatever. What do you make of that and the government approach to the to how the public will be involved in the drafting and formation of this legislation?
Well, I can understand why the government does not like the idea of holding a formal consultation because this is quite a unique local legislation. Unlike other legislations that are being on the agenda of the legislative council under the normal legislative process on specific bills, there might be need to hold a formal consultation, like 1 or 2 months or 3 months, so that the public can submit whatever they think about the legislation, including whether there should be such a legislation. But in the local legislation on national anthem is now in the Basic Law Annex. So number one, the question of whether there is a need to have a local legislation, I don't think the government would like to open a public formal consultation, which may say receive say certain kind of argument, opinions that say there's no need to do so. So the local legislation has to be say within the national law that's already been enforced in mainland China. So the question is really how to strike a balance between say one country, two system, and so also being specific while also allowing flexibility so that it can be enforced in the most smooth and uncontroversial way. And secondly, I think practically or realistically, you can't stop people say making views, and it's easy for say it's already happening that the society radio programs like this are already say giving comments on this local legislation. So consultation, in a sense, is already happening. So
you don't need a formal consultation. You don't need
ideally,
a white
I would
paper.
say a formal consultation is needed so that it makes good. Because after all, as one of the guest speakers has said, there's a fear element in it. Now that the relations between mainland Hong Kong, the central government and Hong Kong is strained, doing something like a formal consultation will help. But it's still possible, of course, to me that the public or the legislation or LegCo can still say fully listen or consult the public without a so-called formal consultation.
What about? I mean, because there are certain parallels with the situation with co-location, with the government saying, we're obliged to do this, we've got to do this quickly. There's no choice here. There is only one possibility, and so on. So there will be no consultation. And even perhaps with Carrie Lam and the Palace Museum, where decisions were made without any kind of consultation, they were made in secret by a secret body, and so on. Could we stretch this out and say that this is an approach by this new administration, that they are moving away from the idea of public consultations? Is that a trend?
I think that's the greatest concern that now whatever, say, there is a mainland or central government element in it, be it the Palace Museum or the co-location and then the national anthem, the government would refrain from, say, holding a formal consultation, apparently worrying that it's already something that the central government, the Chinese government has already dictate something or the broad framework or even the content or the details of which, and there's no room or very little room for Hong Kong people to talk about it, to make dissenting views. I think that's the greatest concern. As I said earlier, ideally, formal consultation, even as a form, is important, particularly on a lot of issues that involve fear and lack of understanding. By having a formal consultation, at least the public will know exactly, or the government looks good in trying to say tackling concerns of the people.
Chris, is there a danger here for Carrie Lam in that if there's a public consultation, if the way things go now, she can kind of finesse through kind of a watered down, a weakened law that's not going to be a complete global laughingstock. But if there's a public consultation, people come out and take these really hardline positions. This is, we have to fight this. We have to fight Beijing. And then Beijing turns around and says, oh, no. Now you got to bring in the hardest possible law, right? Do you think Carrie Lam's thinking there's danger in a public consultation and that it'll just get everybody all riled up?
I guess exactly. You can imagine that if there's, say, 1 or 2 months or 3 months consultation, there will be a lot of submissions. And then the government will have to, say, analyze, document, and quantify, say, the kind of submissions. Imagine that there's a body of opinion who say, well, there's no need to do so. Let's do it in guidelines, or even just a gentle reminders to the public. No need to have a local legislation. I think that will cause huge embarrassment, not to say the least.
Well, maybe because under CY Lung,
the constitutional problem is an issue. And now that it's already in Annex 3, the Hong Kong is obliged to enact it in a local law. If Hong Kong failed to do so, it's a constitutional issue. Yeah, but
under CY Lung, you'd have 5 people say one thing, 1,000 say another, and the report would come out and they'd say, "Oh, opinions were mixed on this." They didn't really. It was quantified, but then it wasn't accurately reflected.
I think Chris brought out a very good point that with the co-location issues and the national anthem issues, the Hong Kong government is dancing to the tune of the Beijing government. Trying to avoid embarrassment, or in a way, there's basically a strict order from the Beijing government and told Carrie Lam or the government to just do it. So that is why they are trying everything to bypass the Legislative Council or even not even conducting a public consultation. And it is unfortunate, and we can see that the increased influence and hindering of Hong Kong's rule by the Beijing government. And if the pro-Beijing camp has the right reason, and if I believe most of the Hong Kong people are at least love Hong Kong, they shouldn't worry to have a public consultation. Now, what is sad is that we've got a bunch of politicians or pro-establishment camp who are trying to use this legislation to force people to love their country. Now, that's the problem. Now, what is ironic is when they are trying to use legislation to force Hong Kong people to love the country, Carrie Lam's husband and his son is a British citizen, and most of the Hong Kong government officials' sons are foreign citizens.
Lawrence Ma?
Even Lawrence Ma. He's a DAB member, but he's also holding a Australian passport. So these guys are, they are trying to.
Mr. Ma?
Mr. Ma. The government has to function according to law. You got to read the basic law in order to understand what the government has to do. It cannot depart from the basic law in enacting this legislation. If you read Section 8, Article 18, that's the whole where the national anthem law was annexed in Annex 3 was because of Article 18. In Article 18, it says that national law is to be applied. The word apply in Hong Kong, it is a direct application. You have to adopt it. It is not an opportunity for you to rewrite it. So when you do a public consultation are applicable to laws that are originated from the Hong Kong government as part of our local system. But this law is not originated from our local system, and therefore the room for discussion, rewriting, amendment is very limited. So as a result, I mean, the law requires the government to apply it. So if you got the government has to apply. It's not a matter of Carrie Lam. It's not a matter of C.Y. Leung. It's got nothing to do with that. It's the basic law requiring you to do so.
Okay, we've got a break now for the news. Drop us a line, backchat@rthk.hk with your thoughts. Later talking about Saudi Arabia as well. Michael Tin joining us after the news. Thanks to Chris Young. The weather, sunny intervals during the day. 25 degrees now. Humidity 77%. Welcome back. This is Backchat on a Wednesday morning. Heated discussion going on during the news break here in the studio. We have Andrew Work as a co-host. I'm Hugh Chiverton with Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Foundation, and Avery Ng, who's chairman of the League of Social Democrats. And we're also joined now by NPC delegate, legislator of the organisation Roundtable, Michael Tin. Mr. Tin, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're talking about the anthem law and the question of consultations as well, and the need or lack of a need for a consultation. Okay, some thoughts from listeners. Thank you very much indeed. Henry says, the lead question suggests that people are anxious about the anthem law. Why should we be so jittery about this? I think it's only those who regularly display disrespect to the national anthem in the public but do not want to go to jail that are anxious. They obviously know what they're doing. Ordinary citizens should have no concerns. TC, though, says there are some issues with local legislation of a national anthem law. First, there's the definition of what constitutes common sense. What's common sense for you may not be so for others. Who's the government or the courts to decide what's common sense? Second, Rimsky-Yun's comment on how the law won't cover every situation is rather dangerous, as it'll allow law enforcement to have a wide interpretation of the law, which ultimately will lead to endless litigation. After the proposed law is passed locally, I think to avoid the risk of criminal prosecution, it'll be wise to turn off TVs in all restaurants and eateries in Hong Kong when the national anthem is played during the public service announcement before the 6:30 news on TVB Jade. Third, morality or respect can't be instilled through legislation. If anything, this law will make anyone prosecuted a martyr. And he attaches also a link, as is on the Facebook page, you can go there if you choose, as things stand, to a parody version of the March of the Volunteers. Thank you for those, TC. Some email comments. Okay, Fergus says, consultations are merely a sop to the absence of real democracy. It's curious here, though, as normally the government cherry-picks responses to shore up its predetermined positions. Absence of them on the two Backchat topics here is instructive. The government wants to no spanner in the works to obstruct Beijing's edicts. We need to explore more how the liaison office is pushing its will here, as this is another departure from Hong Kong's political culture. File this one, like the Benedict Rogers case, under the category national sovereignty / foreign affairs. The Xi Jinping appeasement continues. G says, first suggested amendment, provision for exemption from standing on medical or age grounds. Pete says, I would imagine that if you were a pro-democracy legislator and do not stand quite straight enough, or don't look solemn enough, or weren't quite serious enough, as determined by the DEB mind readers, then you end up in prison and you are disqualified from LegCo. That comes from Pete. Mr. Tin, you said that you were in favour of a consultation, but the government and Rita Fan even more so have very clearly said there isn't, and we've been hearing from Lawrence Ma this morning that there isn't really a need because the scope of the consultation could be only very, very narrow, given that we have to adopt legislation that's already in Annex 3. Why are you holding out for a consultation?
As far as I'm concerned, anything that has a criminal element to it should really be treated carefully. You're talking about throwing people in jail under convicted offenses. So I think consultation with this kind of nature of a bill is something that Hong Kong people would want. There are 16 elements in the national bill, national law on the anthem. Some of those definitely do not apply to Hong Kong. Some needs to be amended. There may be others that needs to be added. All I can say is the political climate today and the trust that people have, it's a lot lower than 20 years ago. If you look at the wording of the national flag and the national emblem, it's actually very loose. It's very, very loose. I don't think in today's political climate, if you were to enact local legislature or
on the national flag and the national emblem, it would be worded in such a loose nature. People would want something that is a little bit more specific. Okay, you may not need to write everything in black and white, but throughout discussion in LegCo, there will be questions. Every legislator will be asking for bringing up all kinds of different scenarios, and government needs to have a response. Every one of those response would provide a basis for future court ruling. So I think a formal consultation is important simply because it is not something that we come up with. It is derived from a national law in which there were elements that we need to really decide how to handle locally. Now, the key stakeholders, the authorities, so far have not categorically said there would be no no consultation. They said listen to views. Frankly, government is always supposedly be listening to views on everything that they do. I think government would be open to a formal consultation in this particular area, especially when they've been accused of not having done so with the co-location bill, which has really actually drew a lot of different opinions from various quarters of society.
Lawrence Ma?
Yes, there are the rooms for consultation would be very narrow because the law, basic law, our constitution, requires it to be applied and adopted. The room for negotiating away from a 3 years imprisonment, for example, it's very, very limited. You can't remove from that. I mean, if you remove the 3 years imprisonment as a maximum sentence, it would done away the entire sanction of the law. If you look back to the national flag and emblem law, the maximum sentence is 3 years, which is exactly the same as in the mainland China. What we have to modify is the administrative detention, 15 days of administrative detention without trial. That part, we don't have it in Hong Kong. We have to delete that and just make everything, just to delete that because it's not compatible with our system. But other things, for example, the 3 years maximum sentence has to remain.
Because that's at 3 years. That seems crazy. I'm sure a lot of people that had missed that detail listen to this now. They're going, what? 3 years?
Well, maximum sentence is 3 years. If you look at the national emblem and flag law...
What else can you get 3 years for? Like breaking and entering?
No, not even.
No, the maximum...
I mean, 3 years.
Andrew, the maximum is 3 years. But
okay.
if you go through the history of the cases that has been sentenced, people are only sentenced to say, for example, the maximum is 3 weeks, 16 days... 3 months.
This is for flag
come on.
400.
This is just nonsense.
Can Hong Kong courts use Chinese courts for precedent now?
No, you can't.
Okay, so these
No, this is the Hong Kong cases.
These are Hong Kong.
These are Hong Kong cases.
All about the flag,
No,
right?
but
yeah.
Okay.
But I have to stress this that this is a rare occasion that I do agree with Michael Tin that we need a public consultations and we cannot allow such. A severe criminal offense wordings to be applied in Hong Kong. Just step back and look.
We didn't have a consultation about the flag and emblem.
Well, that's the problem. We should have. Now we have to step back and think about the whole thing. How can you disrespect a national anthem in such a way that it justify a 3-year imprisonment or any imprisonment? That's
no,
the
point. Maximum sentence is 3 years.
Maximum. So how?
Every sentence is 3 years.
Lawrence, I asked you that.
You should understand what the maximum sentence is.
I really want to go to jail for 3 years, and I'm really trying to disrespect the
That's
anthem.
your problem.
How can I do that in such a way that I can get 3 years? That's the problem.
You'd have to work pretty hard at it.
You have to work very, very hard.
Very
now, again...
May I interject?
Yeah, go on, Michael.
Yeah.
I'm a elected legislator, so I meet a lot of citizens on the street. I think overall, their concern has not been the sentence, because they know that in NX3 we already have a maximum 3 year on the flag and the emblem. As far as they're concerned, they trust our courts in terms of how they
how they would judge each case, and not just blindly give out everybody 3 years simply because you didn't stand, you weren't standing. They are concerned more about the details of two areas. One is if you are a listener, when the national anthem is played, what do you need to do and what can you definitively not do? Secondly, people are concerned about other stakeholders using the national anthem to achieve other purposes. Okay, filibustering, whatever. I ask a simple question, right? If a legislator in the middle of a chamber meeting take out a recorder and broadcast the national anthem, are we supposed to stand up? What do we do? Is there any consequence once they leave the chamber? These are the issues. Article 1 of the national law says this, okay? This law is drafted to regulate the performance, playing, and use of the national anthem, all right? Therefore, it must also include the intention. These are things that we need to discuss seriously in Hong Kong. China is a very different situation in the mainland, right? I don't think anybody dares to use the national anthem to achieve or play around with it to achieve other purposes. But everybody knows in Hong Kong in the last 20 years, the political climate has changed quite a bit. So these are things that I think other than the normal citizen, there are other people who also want to know.
Michael is pretty sensible in saying that there is, in addition to the national flag and emblem law, there is in this law a parameter issue. That means we should have an exemption for all the passerbys who, say, for example, walk through past.
What about that scenario? What about restaurants? Because it's played every day, of course, on the news. So in a restaurant, if it's played, do you stand up?
No, but if you look at the national flag and emblem law, there is a public element in it.
Yeah.
So, for example, people are convicted because they burn the flag in a rally.
Sure, you don't have to. You won't have to stand up at home. No one thinks.
No, that's in private.
If you're in a restaurant, is that a public place?
Yes.
No, I don't think a restaurant is a public place because the restaurant, when they're playing a TV, putting a TV there, and the TV just shows and broadcasts a national anthem, I don't think there's a public place.
Can I make a comment here? I've checked with my contacts up in Beijing. Article 7 of the national bill says when the national anthem is performed, all those present on site shall stand or whatever, okay? There's a series of requirements. The key is, we have to use our common sense. There's a particular occasion where the national anthem is played, okay, and it's targeted towards all those who's attending that function, all right? So it does not and cannot possibly include passers-by, people in a restaurant, people who's watching the national anthem being played before the 6 o'clock news. Come on.
Okay, so it would never apply on TV? Because
I don't think that's even worth discussing. I mean,
yeah. It's just stupid.
It's a matter of that if you are there, if you are a target audience to which the anthem is played.
Okay.
Then what do you need to do? I mean, there's a big issue about do you really need to stand? I mean, obviously, if you have problem standing, that's a different issue, right?
Okay.
But if you have no problem standing, simply because you think it's no big deal playing the national anthem, you just sit there with your legs crossed. I mean, under the national law, Article 7, you need to stand. Not only stand, but stand solemnly. Then you come back to a description, how do you define solemn?
Solemn, well, we've had trouble over that before, haven't we? Okay, so here's some feedback from listeners. Bowen says, the topic for discussion today is a timely reminder of the chasm between the legal and, to a lesser extent, the political systems in the mainland and Hong Kong. Mainland legislations are couched in terms so broad and general that it may reasonably be inferred that they are intended to deter and even intimidate and to prod people to limit their conduct and to tread as cautiously as possible. For example, Articles 3 and 6 of the mainland's national anthem legislation stipulate point blank that people should respect the national anthem and its performance without giving any hint as to what amounts to disrespect and without specifying the type of penalty to be imposed and the limits thereof. This approach is premised on the existence of a population so huge and crass in general that uncivilized conduct by large segments of it can only be prevented by even crasser intimidation and all manners of manhandling. On the other hand, our legal system is premised on the legality of conduct not prohibited by law, the presumption of innocence, and tightly worded statutes backed up by by case law. This approach is suitable and necessary for our city, since most of the citizens are overall law-abiding and reasonably educated and decent. Where only very small pockets of the population exhibit unbecoming or distasteful behaviour in public when the national anthem is performed, it would be disproportionate to cut such a wide legislative swathe as to put the entire population in danger of potentially breaching the criminal law. Look, therefore, not to those sections in our proposed legislation dealing with performing the national anthem at private funerals, their use in trademarks and advertisements, and the alteration of the lyrics, about all of which there should be not much heated debate. Instead, scrutinise those sections, whether there is open consultation or not, dealing with the demands on people's conduct and manners when the national anthem is performed, even though the SJ sought to forestall concerns and queries over this by saying the legislation couldn't precisely cover all scenarios, implying that it may follow the broad brush approach used in the mainland legislation. Other than this, we need to be vigilant, we always should be, about maintaining the correct burden and standard of proof. That comes from Bowen. Bowen, thank you very much indeed. We've got to call Mike, I think, on the line now. Mike, good morning to you.
Well, Bowen, that sounded like a great government announcement. I mean, is he getting paid by the government to come up with that?
No, rather the contrary, I would have thought.
Well, I mean, I think the biggest issue that we're discussing is really the lack of government's desire to even discuss these things. They don't care. There's some subliminal messages going on in a lot of the discussions. The government doesn't care. I just wanted to, this is comic relief. I think that's the reason they call me. Is I'll throw something in. You notice there's a television RTHK. They're going to show a movie, The Martian, and there's soon. And do you get there's somebody in the background saying, if you don't like it, leave.
In the Martian
background of
I think that they're trying to but it starts out as there's some wise man said, and it's about Hong Kong, and they're making the mention, if you don't like it, leave, and then they kind of flip back to
the Martian,
the Martian thing.
So just to clarify, Mike, this is the ad that TVB is running to promote the movie. I've seen those ads.
The ad TV, but they're sending some subliminal messages, I think, going through there. Anyway, that's the comic relief I've given you.
Okay, Mike, thanks for raising that point. Number 233-88266. Michael Chin, I mean, you've said that you said that you're worried about the lack of consultation over the co-location, and it seems you don't want the government to do it again when it comes here. Is the government giving up on consultations? And if they are, does it matter?
No, they're not giving up on consultation, nor can they afford to give up on consultation. Let me repeat again. In terms of the co-location, I have defended government's position of not conducting a formal consultation simply because I firmly believe an informal consultation has been actually in place for the last 3-4 years. All kinds of different proposals have been brought up, legislators, key stakeholders, all right? And most importantly, it does not apply to every citizen living in Hong Kong. If you don't plan to travel to the mainland, it doesn't really concern you at all. Here we have a piece of legislature that affects every single person living in Hong Kong, because you're bound to get in touch with the national anthem someplace, somewhere, sometime. All right? So the citizen that I've talked to, they want to know more. They, of course, don't...
Well, sorry, Mr. Tin, you were the one who just... Sorry,
but they want to
hang on. You were the one who raised the example of the co-location as a precedent, as a worrying precedent, or something that has caused anxiety in the community, and that's a reason for having the consultation this time round.
My point is that I can support government's position on not having a formal consultation on co-location, because actually it's been talked about, discussed over a long period of time. But national anthem, how long has it been since we started talking about it? Not even a month, right? So this is a case where people have a lot of questions because it affects a lot of a wide cross spectrum of citizens. So I think this is something we need to handle with care.
Okay, some more thoughts from listeners. Craig says, question, if I'm out with a friend for an early dinner in a venue where they have the TV on in the background, what happens at 6:30 when the national anthem is played and I'm busy eating and don't stand up? Can I expect to be bundled in the back of a transit van and end up in a real education camp in China? To be safe, TVB should stop broadcasting the national anthem to protect people from prosecution. And S says, I think once such laws are passed, Carrie Lam will have to rethink the housing policy. Hong Kong will need more high-rise prisons with education, health and sports facilities. Colin says, in the US, the national anthem is widely played and respected even at local sporting events. They have the right balance. The Chinese national anthem is hardly played at all in Hong Kong. Are the Hong Kong government not going over the top? This is like a red rag to a bull to introduce legislation. That comes from Colin. Colin, thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you very much indeed to our guests this morning. To Michael Tin, joining us on the line there, NPC delegate and legislator, of course. To Avery Ng, chairman of the League of Social Democrats, and Lawrence Ma, barrister and chairman of the China-Australia Legal Foundation. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us this morning. Bring the time now to 23 minutes past 9. And